desert wind was cruel that evening. It tore across the dry plains of Texas, dragging sand and sagebrush, hissing against the wooden frames of half-dead homesteads. The sky was painted the color of burnt copper, and the last sunlight stretched long, dying shadows over the ground. Thomas Cade rode through that wind, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a dark hat pulled low and eyes sharp from years of solitude. He had the face of someone weathered not by age but by time, grief, and the endless silence of open country. His horse, a gray stallion named Flint, carried him slow but steady. Cade wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for anyone. Truth was, Thomas Cade hadn't been looking for much of anything since his wife and child had been taken by fever 5 winters ago. He lived out on his lonely spread of land, pushing cattle, mending fences, and keeping his distance from townsfolk who still whispered about him, the rancher who buried his whole family in the frozen ground. But that evening, fate had a way of pulling him into a story he hadn't asked for. The house on the hill, Cade first heard it before he saw it. A sound that didn't belong in the stillness of the prairie. A woman's scream. Not far ahead, perched on a ridge, a weather-beaten house sat crooked against the dying light. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, but the sound that reached Cade was sharper than any homestead noise. Yelling, a man's bark, then the unmistakable crack of flesh meeting flesh. Cade pulled Flint's reins, narrowing his eyes. He could have turned away. Wasn't his business. Folks fought their fights all across the frontier, and stepping into another man's home was a sure way to invite lead between your ribs. But then came another sound, children crying. High, thin, desperate wails. Something shifted in Cade's chest. He remembered the sound of his own baby girl crying once, years ago, when fever had already taken hold of her. The memory wasn't kind. He tugged Flint forward. When Cade reached the ridge, he saw a sight that twisted his jaw tight. In front of the house, a man in a sweat-stained shirt had a woman pinned against the porch rail. She was slim, face bloodied, dress torn at the shoulder. The man struck her again, snarling words Cade couldn't yet make out. On the porch, 3 little girls, none older than 10, clutched each other, crying, their small hands shaking as they watched their mother take the blows. Cade's hand dropped to his revolver. The intervention, the man raised his fist again. That was when Cade's voice cut through the evening like a rifle shot. Enough. The man froze, turning. His hand still gripped the woman's hair, but his face went pale when he saw Cade sitting tall on Flint, a .45 Colt glinting in his fist. This ain't your concern, stranger. The man spat, though his voice had lost some of its fire. Cade's eyes stayed cold. It is now. The woman, still gasping for breath, looked up through swollen eyes. She saw the rancher, saw the gun, and a flicker of desperate hope passed across her battered face. The man shoved her to the ground, stepping forward, puffing his chest like a rooster. You best ride on, cowboy. These here are my women, my house, my law. Cade dismounted, boots crunching gravel as he stepped closer. The wind whipped his duster around his legs. You lay another hand on her, Cade said evenly, and you'll be spitting teeth out in hell. For a moment, no one moved. The girls held their breath. The woman stared at Cade like he was a figure from some half-forgotten dream. The man clenched his fists, glaring, but when his eyes dropped to Cade's revolver, steady, unwavering, his courage faltered. With a curse, he spat in the dirt and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert wind. The choice, Cade holstered his Colt and looked at the woman. She was trembling, holding her ribs where bruises were already forming. Her daughters rushed to her, burying their faces in her torn dress. Cade could see she'd been beaten more than once. This wasn't the first time. You all right, Mom? Cade asked, voice low. She lifted her chin, proud despite the blood on her lip. I'll live? Cade nodded. His gaze drifted to the house, where lamplight flickered behind thin curtains. He ain't done with you. Her silence was answer enough. For a long moment, Cade stood there, the dying sun burning red across the land. Something deep inside him stirred, the memory of losing everything, of burying his loved ones, of swearing he'd never care again. But here was a woman and 3 children, broken under a man too cruel to call himself human. Cade took a breath. Then he said the words that would change everything. You're coming with me. The woman's eyes widened. You don't even know me." "Don't have to," Cade said. His voice carried the weight of finality. "Pack what you can. Tonight." The little girls stared at him, half afraid, half in awe. The woman searched his face, as if to see whether this was real. "Why?" she whispered. Cade's gaze never wavered. "Because no one deserves to live like this." Behind them, the door creaked open. The man was back, with a shotgun in his hands. The shotgun's twin barrels glimmered in the lamplight. The man stood framed in the doorway, eyes red with rage, knuckles white where he clutched the stock. "You think you can come here, cowboy?" he growled, voice drunk with fury, "and take what's mine." Cade's hand was already near his Colt, his stance squared, calm as a coiled rattler. His gaze flicked to the woman and her girls, huddled behind the rail. "Stay low," he said quietly, never taking his eyes from the man. The man sneered, teeth yellow. "She's my wife. Those girls are mine. And I'll see you dead before I let some stranger ride off with M." The shotgun lifted. Cade moved first. The gunfight, a thunderous blast, shattered the quiet night, wood splintering as the shotgun roared. But Cade had already rolled off the porch rail, Colt barking in answer. The bullet struck the man's shoulder, spinning him back into the doorway with a howl. The woman screamed. The children clung tighter. The man staggered, cursed, and raised the shotgun again. But Cade was already on the porch, a predator closing distance. He struck the barrel aside with his left hand, and the second blast tore a hole through the wall instead of Cade's chest. In one swift motion, Cade slammed the Colt's butt across the man's jaw. The shotgun clattered to the floor. The silence after the fight was filled only by the ragged breaths of the woman and her children. Cade pressed the cold steel of his revolver under the man's chin. "One more swing at her," Cade said, voice hard as granite, "and you won't draw another breath." The man spat blood, eyes burning with hate. But he saw the truth in Cade's face. This wasn't a man bluffing. This was a man who'd buried too much already, who'd walked through hell to stop another grave from being dug. The fight drained out of him. He slumped, cursing low. Cade kicked the shotgun aside, then turned to the woman. "Get the girls," he said. "Now." Leaving the past behind, the woman gathered her daughters, clutching their little hands. The youngest, no more than 4, buried her tear-streaked face against Cade's leg, as though he were already the only safety she knew. Cade guided them down the porch steps, Flint snorting at their approach. The woman looked back once at the house that had been nothing but walls of misery. And for the first time that night, she didn't tremble. She turned her back to it, and didn't look again. As they rode into the vast, open dark, the man's voice echoed faintly from behind them. "You'll regret this, cowboy! You hear me? They're mine!" "They'll always be mine." But the night swallowed his curses, and the prairie wind carried them away. The journey for days, Cade led them across the frontier. The woman's name was Eliza McGraw, and her daughters were Sarah, Lydia, and little Mary. They rode tired, hungry, but free, each mile putting more distance between them and the man who'd kept them chained in fear. The land was vast and merciless. Dry gullies cracked open the earth. Coyotes yipped at night, and dust storms swallowed the horizon by day. Cade shared his meager supplies, taught the girls how to keep a campfire low, how to listen for rattlers in the brush. At night, when the girls finally fell asleep, Eliza would sit by the fire across from him. She'd whisper things she hadn't told anyone, about the nights she feared she wouldn't wake alive, about the shame of being beaten for giving birth to only daughters, about the loneliness of crying herself to sleep while her girls clung to her for comfort. Cade listened, silent, steady. The firelight carved shadows into the hard planes of his face, but his eyes softened when they met hers. He never spoke of his own loss, but she could sense it in him. It was there, unspoken, that the bond formed. Two broken souls on the edge of the world, holding each other up against the vast emptiness. Trouble rides behind, but trouble has a long memory in the West. 3 nights into their journey, Cade noticed tracks. Horses. 4, maybe 5 riders. They weren't just passing. They were following. By dawn, it became clear the beaten husband hadn't taken his defeat lying down. He'd gone to the town's rougher men, outlaws who'd do anything for whiskey and coin. Cade knew the type. Hired guns. Men who lived by the pistol and thought themselves kings of the dust. That evening, just as the family settled near a dry creek bed, the riders appeared on the ridge. Silhouettes against the blood-red sky. Laughing, spitting guns slung easy in their hands. One of them called down, voice carrying sharp across the wind. "Cade! That woman belongs to McGraw. You hand her over now, and maybe we won't leave your bones for the buzzards." Eliza froze, clutching her girls. Cade stood, revolver at his side, gaze steady. He didn't shout, didn't posture. His voice carried low, certain. "She's with me?" The leader chuckled, spitting tobacco. "Then I reckon you're fixin' to die with her." The riders began to spread out along the ridge, preparing to surround the creek bed. The air grew heavy, as if even the desert was holding its breath. Cade glanced at Eliza, then at her daughters, huddled together, eyes wide. He stepped forward, putting himself between them and the men on the ridge. And with a grim finality, he drew his Colt. The last light of dusk gleaming on the barrel. "Then let's finish this."